To begin, before I introduce the speakers for Provinces and Territories Speak Out, which is the session you're in, we're going to ask a student of Elizabeth Fry, Saskatchewan, to come up and do one of the masks.
All right, so this is a mask that represents the woman stuck in darkness for over 40 years. My struggles will never be forgotten, but I know that I have been given a chance to forgive and move on. I can see a brighter future on the horizon. Thank you, Creator, for this chance. For the short time I've been at the Healing Lodge, so 13 days, I can feel change already, forever humble.
Thank you very much. So this session is called Provinces and Territories Speak Out, a 4-district scan across the across the states of the provinces and territorial jails and remand centres. We are going to move across the country from west to east. And I'll just give you a little bit of bio now about the presenters first. So the first presenter is actually not here in person. She sent a video. It's Katherine Alexander. Katherine Alexander is the Executive Director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Yukon. Small shop, one gal, she says. And a regional advocate for the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. She's resided in the Yukon for 19 years and divides her time with work, art, amateurish animal husbandry, house renovations, and canoe trips. She was recently selected to participate in the Canadian Women's Foundation Coady Institute Leadership Program, where she'll be creating a social enterprise model for female artists with lived experience to collaborate with community artists and make spaces to create fine crafts for commercial galleries. The second presenter will be Sue Delanoy, who is currently Executive Director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan. She's been working in the social work and advocacy fields for close to 30 years on a variety of initiatives, such as childcare issues, regionally and nationally. She's been the child and youth advocate of the Saskatoon Communities for Children and initiated several endeavors in Saskatchewan, from prostitution prevention, gang intervention, human trafficking, and domestic violence. She's a keen advocate for women and human rights and a dedicated mother and grandmother. I'll be the third presenter. My name is Bryonie Baxter. I'm the Executive Director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa. I'm also the President of the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario and a regional advocate for Ontario and region for the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. For 20 years, I've worked as an educator in a number of different schools in the Peel District School Board, including positions as Vice Principal, IB Coordinator, and Teacher. I co-authored The Future We Want, Building Inclusive Schools, and also numerous teaching articles. I moved to Ottawa in 2008 and began working for the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa then. In April, I was awarded the Leading Women Building Communities Award by the Province of Ontario for community leadership, and I'm the mother of 2 boys, Merlin, 15, and Liam, 11. And our last speaker today will be Darlene MacEachern. She's been with the Elizabeth Fry Society of Cape Breton for a whopping 29 years. She's Executive Director there. She's also a regional advocate for Atlantic region of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Society Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. She's also the mother of 2 adult daughters and a board member of CAFES, a dedicated and very respected board member of CAFES. So we're going to begin with the video from the Yukon and move, as I said, from west to east, and then there'll be plenty of time, hopefully, for questions at the end. Thank you.
When you're born, you were determined by the elders if you were a warrior. Once you are, then your life is different. They have to treat you differently from all the rest of the people.
Las dones, everybody. There's a big bowl of soup you give it to me, little Uncle.
Too much?
Yeah. Look at Snowshoe. Don't know how many years I really walk on snowshoes.
Huh.
It's bad here, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, in and out constantly. Breaches of alcohol mostly is what I had.
I know. You should never have been there. You didn't need to go there.
No. I mean, the last serious charge I had was assault, and that got dropped. Because I didn't even assault nobody.
So you got charged with assault, it got dropped, and then you got how many breaches?
Since 2012, they counted 17 alcohol breaches. 13, 14, yeah, 3 years, 20. I don't know, but I got a thick record of breaches since I turned 19.
Yeah, no real charges, all breaches.
Yeah.
How many times did they send you over there?
I was like, at first I was in and out every weekend. Like, just get released, like, oh, get released from court, and then same weekend I'm back in doing the same thing. It's stupid.
It is stupid.
Yeah. Nobody knew what it was like. Like, oh. They're like, oh, some of my friends are like, I guess I'll see you next weekend. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, you mean over there?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
shit.
in jail. You'll be back next week. I kept saying, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm gonna change. This time it's different. What's different? Nothing.
The second box I opened up, I found a hell
When I finally stood up for myself, I said, you know what? I have an addiction. I'm not gonna deal with this anymore.
Hey, look at what I found.
I'm an alcoholic. And you can't just tell an alcoholic to sober up.
That's why I was hoping in the new WCC, when we were in the old WCC, they were promising, oh yeah, new programs this, programs that, it's going to be way better. And then we went there and it was just,
I'm like, oh.
like even the building sucks. Who makes a building with mostly windows? In the winter, the whole building freezes. And then we asked for like lawn johns, and they're like, no, we don't authorize those kind of clothes. So we had to literally argue with the staff to get extra clothing. I fought for programs also, and they're like, oh, you guys have programs, we don't have programs.
You don't. You don't have programs, and it's been clearly indicated to them over and over and over again from a variety of sources that it's not happening, and they just dig their heels in and believe their own propaganda.
Yeah, and it's sad because, you know, I think people up there deserve much more.
Down
Katherine speaking.
You have a call from
Roxanne.
an inmate at the White Horse Correctional Center. Your call has been accepted.
Oh, holy shit. Hello? Hey, how's it going? Not bad. Holy fucking rough. Yeah, are you free? Yeah, I'm totally free. Okay, 'cause I have point form. You got point form? Give it to me. Yeah. Okay, ready? Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. So, Roxanne's interview. Christ. Okay. Some days I feel like a caged animal. My human rights are violated. Correction Act is not being followed. In that it's the right to be assessed and have the proper access to medical practitioners. If you are diagnosed with mental problems, you're not always given the right medication. So, I was a proud Aboriginal woman before I came in here, and I feel as when I was showering in APU, I watched my own culture be washed down the drain. And I really hate to say it, but essentially I feel as if I'm in a residential school. Only because, I stand up in front of myself every day at 6:45. I sit down with the girls every day at 7. We eat lunch at 12:05. 4:30 we eat dinner. You know what I mean? It's routine. It's drilled into all of our heads. This is the way that we have to do things. We're only allowed to speak when spoken to. We get out of line, we get in trouble, charged basically. And the only difference is I'm not being sexually abused. But on the other hand, I'm being mentally, physically, and spiritually abused. And a system that was built to correct me.
Drop. There we go. We'll get there. You only have to tell me 10 times.
So now I'm feeling bad I didn't make a video. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our provincial correctional in Saskatchewan. Our main facility is at Pine Grove, which is in Prince Albert, which is 90 miles from here, however many kilometers that is. Like, I'm old, that's how I think. And also we have a remand center in Regina. So it's a small remand center. So the province is 1 million people. So divided in half, of people from southern Saskatchewan, if you're on remand, you might stay in a very small remand center out of Regina for a while, or you would go to Pine Grove Correctional Facility. Pine Grove was built to only house a minimum amount of women a few years ago, but had an addition built on it a few years ago, and regularly holds between 140 and 160 women in our province. The facility boasts, you know, a library. There is, you know, cultural programs, and very good cultural programs right now. There's actually a cultural center at Pine Grove, and there's ceremonial opportunities for the women at Pine Grove. There is a parenting program. There's opportunities to be outside, and there's also jobs within the institution, as well as some educational programs. There are 8 units in Pine Grove, and they vary from maximum to minimum. So based on your crimogenic factors when you get into the institution, you would take a variety of programming to move you from a maximum to a minimum security level within the institution. So some of the issues that we wanted to talk about or highlight are a few. I was asked to comment on a few different things within our institution. And one of the first was whether it was overcrowded or not. Right now, with the addition of the new building onto Pine Grove, I can't say it's overcrowded. However, right now at Pine Grove, the women's gym has been taken over by the men's institution. So we have men in our women's gym because the men's institution is overcrowded. So it's a CSC, Correctional Service of Canada agreement. The women's institution is helping out the men's institution in Prince Albert. So right now the women have lost their gym for housing men in the gym, and I believe we have about 30 men in the gym. They've been there quite a while, and we regularly ask, when are the men leaving? As soon as the new institution will be built for men. They've been there since August of last year. The women have not had their gym since August of last year. The healthcare within the institution is, so this is kind of hard for me because I have quite a good relationship with corrections, and I want to keep it that way because that allows me to come and visit the women on a regular basis. And I'm looking at a lot of other Elizabeth Frys across the country because we have that push-pull. We go in and we're like, it doesn't work, nothing works, this sucks, this isn't very good. On the other hand, I'd like to be able to go in and see the women. And so advocacy versus the reality of things, we dance around quite a few different issues, but we've maintained quite a good relationship. So I'm going to speak from the heart and a little bit from the mind. And a wise elder once told me, maybe it doesn't work because it isn't supposed to, and maybe we have to think about all of that. So regarding healthcare, it's very challenging for a lot of the women in our correctional institution. Most of the women we meet, and I should really tell you, most of the women that we meet are Aboriginal, about 90%, 89, 91% of the women that we meet are Aboriginal. The guards within the institution, I would say a high number of the correctional workers are of First Nation, but some aren't. The understanding of Aboriginal culture, it's hit and miss within our institution. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it isn't. It seems to be the higher level has more understanding, but from the bottom up, it isn't always there. Healthcare within the institution, most of the women are addicts, and addiction is a big deal for the women. The methadone program is hugely controversial. Whatever meds the women happen to have been using on the outside when they come in, there is a certain type of medication that they would be allowed to use within the institution. There's no deferring from that, and so there's always crisis for healthcare for the women. There is some new nursing staff right now at our provincial correctional in Pine Grove, and they're trying quite a lot to do a lot more. I think some of you have met our students or some of the new partnership. I have a partnership right now with the College of Nursing, and we take 6 nurses with us when we go visit every second week, and the number of healthcare questions that we answer on a regular basis are quite high. Also, our team of visitors, we also have 2 lawyers that come in with us, and we answer quite a few different judicial questions or anything to do with the law. The conditions of confinement, segregation is overused, in my opinion. It's overused within the institution. One of the new units that was built at Pine Grove was a mental health unit. However, the clinical FTEs that were supposed to be in that unit have been pulled, so that unit sometimes sits completely empty. So to manage a lot of the mental health issues within the institution, segregation or administrative segregation is utilized, a practice that we would like to see not happen. As far as release and reintegration goes, most of the programming, well, first and foremost, the women on remand within a center, I'm pretty sure it's like this all across Canada. Women on remand have access to absolutely no programming at all. So when we come in, we start with where you're from, where you're going to be going, and let's start right on your release planning. So we do a lot of release planning within the institution. It's taken us a couple of years, too, to work more symbiotically with the institution to say, you may have some caseworkers that are working, but we also have some other caseworkers. Most people who are incarcerated don't really want to be doing their case planning with their jailers. They'd rather be doing it with their friends and their advocates, and that would be us. But we really try and work together and try and do a lot of release and reintegration planning. We see a bit of a revolving door for a lot of women. When women do not get to their issues, they can be out, and within 2 or 3 weeks, for a breach or something else, or due to lack of housing, reintegration, or you're so hopeful when you're incarcerated, and you're also jail sober when you're incarcerated, to go back home into the same thing that you sort of propelled you to where you're at. I always tell everybody it'd be like me living in a cheesecake factory. On Monday, I would say, no cheesecake. By Wednesday or Thursday, I'd be eating the cheesecake. So, for a lot of different women, it's very challenging. So we do see a bit of a revolving door. One of the things that has saved us, and there was a workshop earlier this morning that I was supposed to be on, was telephone access. And I see some of my colleagues here that did a workshop this morning. We do have a toll-free number that the women can call us. And honestly, I don't have enough arms and enough ears, and we do not have enough staff to answer the number of calls that we get to the office. We're inundated by in fact, when I hear a phone ring right now, I'm just like, oh my God. And it's everything from us de-escalating a woman on segregation who's attempting suicide, to somebody just wanting us to help them find out about their charge, to somebody asking us to help them with their children and their familial situation. Visitation is a challenge in the institution. Not a lot of visitors. There has been a real push to have children come to the institution, but when you're a province of 1 million and the provincial correctional is in Prince Albert, and you live in Lloydminster or Estevan or somewhere else in this province, the reality of you getting a visit isn't there as much as it probably should be. So overcrowding, yes, but not due to the institution itself right now, due to the fact that men have taken over the gym and will for a little while. Healthcare is a huge challenge and will continue to be. Conditions of confinement, segregation is overused, and it's overused for administration. Release and reintegration, we can always do a better job of that, and the challenges continue for us here in the prairies.
Thank you very much. And I should say that when we assembled this panel, we asked each of the panelists to sort of deal with a few common issues. You're going to hear similar patterns repeated right across as we move across the country, and that is sort of the point, right? So there'll be a time for questions at the end where we can address some of these in more detail. So I am speaking to you today as President of the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario, not as ED of eFry Ottawa, because as President of CEFSO, I am able to give you the cross-province scan. It took us 5 years of negotiations with the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, but we now go into every jail and remand center, detention center, that houses women right across the province. And I was trying to do a quick mental arithmetic. I think that's about 16 jails. So we have now trained provincial advocates, similar to the federal advocates, and we go into every jail right across the province that houses women to examine conditions of confinement and systemic issues. So the report I'm presenting today is that cross-province scan. About 67% of all incarcerated individuals in Ontario are on remand, and you'll see that very similar statistics repeated across the country. That's a trend that began in the 1990s, and the growth in remand detention is one of the main causes of overcrowding in penitentiaries and detention centres across the country. Ontario has the largest or the heaviest reliance on bail sureties, and that's according to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and it's one factor in the growth of the remand population in Ontario. For some reason, Ontario relies on sureties far more than any other province or territory.
We don't.
Those with mental health and addiction issues, and alarmingly and increasingly, we're seeing this trend of those with developmental delays and other neurological conditions such as autism or brain injury, are most subject to remand, ironically. You're supposed to be remanded because of, flight risk, risk to public safety, or, and then there's this little category called administration of justice. And frequently what we're seeing happen is if you are of no fixed address, or if you're developmentally delayed and your group home's thrown you out because you've slapped a group home worker or something like that, and they have nowhere else to put you, you're being remanded for that. So we're seeing this increasing heartbreaking trend of going to a seg cell in a provincial remand centre and speaking to a woman of 20, say, who has the developmental age of 5 and has no ability to comprehend where she is or why she's there or why she can't be with her mum. And we've done significant advocacy and significant media around some of these issues. As a mother of an autistic son, I can tell you that trend is really alarming to me as well. The impact of overcrowding in Ontario, we frequently see beds 3 to a cell, so we're already double bunked. We've got these little cells pretty similar to the seg cell that you're seeing out there with a bunk bed in, but now we're seeing a mattress on the floor, and with the mattress on the floor, as a result of overcrowding, your head is literally inches away from the toilet, and when your bunk mates get down from their beds, they're walking across your beds, or if the guards come in to do a search, they're walking across your bed that you're going to sleep on every night. We sometimes see the room that they see their doctor in or their discharge planner in also being taken over for use for temporary accommodation due to overcrowding as well. And of course, this kind of overcrowding, when you've got, your roommate is tramping dirt from the outside, from yard, all over your sheets that you're about to sleep on, it results in increased tension and therefore increased violence, increased lockdowns, and so it sort of, is cyclical. In terms of healthcare, we're seeing this trend of long wait times to see a doctor, almost no ability to see a dentist whatsoever. With doctors, we're seeing now the nursing staff triaging and basically making a determination about whether they believe you should see a doctor or not. So although the law is that you are to receive the same equal medical care that you would receive external to the facility, that is not in fact happening, because if you have the ability to make an appointment and go see a doctor, whereas you may be prevented from seeing the doctor because the nurse has triaged and decided that she doesn't think you should. Similarly, issues around the doctors changing the meds, so whatever you were prescribed in the community, and we particularly see this with opioids and pain medication being changed by the facility because that particular drug has currency in the jail. And that, obviously, when you're on major mental health meds, can result in substantial withdrawal. There's also wait times for methadone when you first come in, which can result in actual methadone withdrawal in the jail, which is extremely painful. But in addition, we're seeing that methadone is not administered at the same time of day each time. And what that means is that you can actually have methadone administered one day at 8 a.m. and the next day not until 2:30 in the afternoon, and so you see the start of methadone withdrawal. lack of psychiatric medical services, very, very clearly. Largest employer of psychiatrists in the country, but their time is spent doing largely security assessments, you know, what level of security level you're going to be on. We're seeing people with very large wait times to see a psychiatrist. And in some cases, in the north particularly, in Northern Ontario, via telehealth only. So your appointment with your psychiatrist is via video link. Consistent and long-term segregation of those with mental health issues. I don't have time today to tell you about it, but I would urge you to Google the name Christina John, Jahn. That was a Human Rights Tribunal case that we brought with Christina after Christina was locked up for 9 months in a segregation cell due solely to her disabling mental health. And she won that Human Rights Tribunal case. And I have to just quickly say to you that Christina, a woman who's been poor all her life and severely mentally ill all her life, was initially offered a cash settlement by corrections at the tribunal hearing and turned it down because she said, I want remedies that are going to help other women in this. In other words, I want legal change. I want there to be remedies that will benefit other people. So that took an enormous guts, and it has resulted in some really substantive changes. So I would urge you to just Google her name and look that case up. There is a brand new jail in Windsor that has healthcare on site, including X-ray and dental. So we're hoping that this will become, that it will result in some improved services. But the conditions of confinement vary very much from jail to jail, depending on the age of the jail and the facilities, etc. So for most, that is not the case. In terms of conditions of confinement, for example, the Sarnia jail is literally falling apart. It was slated for closure for 4 years. It's now been taken off the closure list because they have nowhere to put people. But there's literally plaster falling off the walls, floor-to-ceiling bars, which is a suicide risk. And ironically, at that jail that we visited, we had the fewest complaints about the treatment by correctional officers of any jail. So they had the worst conditions, but the fewest complaints about treatment by correctional officers. And the women said, the guards are in jail with us here. Like, it's, you know what I mean? So it's just an ironic little footnote. The jail that I serve in Ottawa, the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre, is described by prisoners as one of the worst jails in the province, and this is prisoners who've been in multiple jails sometimes. And what we see as well is lots of times yard time is cancelled, lots of lockdowns, that sort of thing. But we've also made the point that there's really nothing to do in yard when it does exist. You've got your 20 minutes to do what? To walk around a concrete block. So we've said, can't you, Mike Harris in Ontario took away all the basketball nets and stuff like that, but can't you even have, I don't know, exercise diagrams on the wall or something that would give people something healthy and constructive to do during yard time? In terms of release and reintegration issues, a big issue is release from custody. So depending on where you're situated, if you're in Thunder Bay, if you're being held and your home community is far in the north, and you're released unexpectedly from court, so you're taken to a court date and then released unexpectedly, or in Ontario, in Ottawa, you could be released from Pembroke or Cornwall, which is 2 hours away. The OPP will take you to your court appearance, but then they say, well, we're not a taxi service, so we're not taking you back. Well, your keys, your mental health meds, your shoelaces, your belt, your ID, your health card, your seasonally appropriate clothing are all back at the jail, and you're literally left standing in the courthouse with no keys, no mental health meds, no ID, no health card. You can't even go to a hospital and get mental health meds because you don't have your health card. And so we set people up for failure. We set them up to reoffend. And if you're on major mental health drugs in the jail and then you're released with nothing and you don't have a health card, what do you think you're going to do? And the answer is you're going to turn to self-medicating on street drugs, and you just begin that cycle all over again. So we've done significant advocacy around these release from custody issues, and the minister has assured me they're now looking at the issue to try and figure out a province-wide solution. Halfway house beds are paid in some areas of the province and not by others, so that in some cases there is a release option to a halfway house for 90 days. In other cases, there's no release options whatsoever. And then I would just comment on population issues. So obviously across the country, you know, we're seeing the overrepresentation of Indigenous and other racialized groups. The one comment I would make in Ontario with regard to GLADU reports is, first of all, it's inconsistently applied. We actually had a judge in Pembroke from the bench say he was ignoring any GLADU report, which is a Supreme Court edict, so I don't know how you get away with saying that. But also, you're not allowed to choose your GLADU provider. So you can choose your lawyer, but you can't choose who writes your GLADU report in Ontario. Now that's ridiculous to me, because the GLADU reports contain some very personal family history, and there needs to be a good connection with your GLADU writer in order for there to be that trust to be able to reveal and document this history. And so we're starting to do advocacy to try and ensure that people will get the right to choose who their GLADU writer is going to be, because it seems ridiculous. And if there's not a good relationship, then the whole thing breaks down. And the one other thing is women are reporting that they have to wait to be identified as Indigenous in order to get access to Indigenous programming. So they have to wait. They can't self-identify and say they can self-identify, but it's not believed. So then they have to wait to actually have their Indigenous status verified in order to get access to programming, which we think is absurd and ridiculous. And I'll turn it over to the East Coast. Should I get out of the... Yeah, we should move in.
Good afternoon, and thanks for coming to our presentation. I'm doing the Atlantic region, and I'm doing one prison in the Atlantic, and that's Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility, which is located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Here's a picture, and as you can see from the prison, it's co-located with the Nova Scotia Forensic Health Services, which is in the red on this side. So you would think that that would, you know, have great implications for women with mental health issues who are imprisoned in we call it Burnside Prison, but it doesn't. So Central Nova Scotia facility, and I'm going to just shorten that to Burnside, opened in 2001 and replaced the old Halifax Correctional Center. They call it a medium security facility, but we see it as almost a supermax. The way it's situated, there's very little staff. It's done in pods. There's two 17-bed facilities or 16 cell facilities for men, and there's or 7 16-cell and 4 12 cells for women. And there's a pod of guards who sort of manage that. So you can see there wouldn't be a lot of movement because there wouldn't be a lot of staff. Central Nova Scotia boasts a complement of 300 staff. But as you will see when we get to lockdowns, how you can't be at an adequate staffing level to assist in any security issues that happen. So let's go on to the next one. The overcrowding at Central Nova has been predominantly in the male units and mostly on the weekends. I was told that there isn't a lot of overcrowding for women. We've had pockets of it, 1 to 2 days at the most, but they are operating at about 78% capacity on the weekdays and 90% on the weekends. And in the last few months, it's been between 60 and 80%. Approximately 65 to 75% of the women are in remand, which is what we heard consistently across the country. When we talk about healthcare, we talked about it being co-located with the forensic hospital. which will only accept women from Burnside with acute psychiatric conditions. They will not provide ongoing mental health services for women who are incarcerated in the institution. There is no addiction services available at the prison, and everyday medical care, including dental, is provided. But again, as we heard across the country, is when you go in, they take you off all your meds and they put you on different meds, which totally dysregulate you, and then we get into this whole, sort of mental health issue that happens when you're off your meds. The conditions of confinement, I'm going fast here because they tell me I only have 5 minutes and it's really stressful. The conditions of confinement are the women and men are held separately, and interestingly enough, males do not work on the female units. There are admission, discharge, segregation, healthcare. All of those areas are totally independent. Again, it's this whole pod thing. It's not a workable situation at all. The women's unit's in good shape. I was in it probably 2 months ago. There is some new equipment that they've put in, and the facility is not that old, but everything's bolted down. It's the most sterile and horrible place you'll ever see. But it was interesting when the director of corrections took me in. He wanted to take me on a tour because I don't regularly go into Central Nova. My sister society from Halifax does that. And so the first thing the director did was take me on the male unit. And I said, why would you ever take me to the male unit? I'm never going to be working with the men. I don't understand. No, you have to go to the male unit. You have to go to the male unit. So I go on and he said, see how awful it is? And as I was on the male unit, there was another lockdown and something happened. So the emergency response team was going, and I'm thinking, why am I here? And then I realized when he took me over to the female unit, or the women's unit, he said to me, can you see the difference? Can you see how the male unit is so horrible? And I couldn't see any difference. They were both equally horrible in my mind. The Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility and Nova Scotia Department of Justice tell me that they're working on a transgender policy for the women there and the men, and they will likely follow Ontario's lead. That's the word we have. In terms of segregation, I'm told by the director they will only keep somebody in seg for 15 days. The only way they'll go beyond 15 days is if it's an extraordinary circumstance and it has to be approved by the director himself, and there has to be a plan. But I can tell you right now where there's a lot of segregation that goes beyond 15 days, but that's the company line. In terms of lockdowns are a major problem at Nova. In fact, for the women, there's a lockdown at least once a week, and it has nothing to do with the women and everything to do with the men's side. And Heather and I went in and met. Heather's our sister society, our sister from Halifax. She and I went in and met with the superintendent of the facility and the director. And we were told that, there's lockdowns on the women's side because stuff happens on the men's side. And we said, well, why would that matter? What would be the issue there? And they said, well, the staff run over to help. And I said, well, obviously you don't have enough staff. And they said, no, we have enough staff. And I said, well, if you have enough staff, why would the staff feel compelled to leave the women's unit, lock them down when they haven't done anything wrong, and go over? And they said the staff want to go and help. So they just do it. And they admitted that, which was kind of wild, we thought. So I talked to the director 2 days before I came here, and he told me they're still locking down regularly once a week. Release and reintegration. The director's words were they don't really do a good job of this right now, but they're working on it. And it is their plan to hire 3 social workers, and those 3 social workers will work in the 3 biggest facilities. So that would be Cape Breton. Cape Breton has a correctional center, but not for women. The only place that houses women is Halifax. So it'll be Sydney will have a social worker, Halifax will, and the new facility that they just built in New Glasgow will. And apparently the social worker will be doing risk assessments, and she will also be providing release and reintegration planning. The concern I have about that is, as you heard from the other societies, is that when women are incarcerated, in order to get out on any kind of conditional release like day parole, there has to be some sort of demonstrated change that the Parole Board of Canada looks for. In Nova Scotia, we have a federal provincial agreement in terms of parole. So all the feds do parole, even if it's provincial parole. The rules are slightly different, but it's still predominantly under the federal jurisdiction. So what happens is a woman will go in, she will get no programming. The only programming provided is provided by EFRI Halifax, and they don't provide addictions counseling, they don't provide mental health services, so there's nothing else other than the programs that our sister goes in and provides. So when they do the application for the release, the parole release, the board, who never sees them, it's all a paper decision, will come back and say, there's no demonstrated change. How can we release somebody on parole when there's no demonstrated change? And if that were to happen in the federal system, as regional advocates, what I would say to the women is, every week you put in a request for this program. And I know Heather and them started to do that, but it still didn't make an impact on the parole board. It's not the woman's fault that she doesn't have access to programs. So, but they still keep her in longer. Probably about 5 years ago, we saw a number of provincial paroles coming out. I've saw one in 5 years from provincial women coming to Cape Breton, and I think there's very few in Halifax. So if we move on to remand versus release, I can tell you from the Cape Breton area of the women that we have, and we would have the most Aboriginal women who are going on remand in Nova Scotia because we have 5 Aboriginal sites in Cape Breton, and we have 1 Aboriginal court in Eskasoni. And remands are mostly coming for Aboriginal women through those courts. So we see a lack of safe housing, which is an issue that our sisters have talked about. There's nowhere for them to release them to, so they're going to put them in jail to keep them safe. Long wait times for community mental health in Nova Scotia. It doesn't matter where you go in the province. I think it's like 8 months to get into mental health services in Cape Breton. Lack of community resource options during the initial charge. So, the lawyer's going in to argue that, we have a release plan, but there really is nowhere. If the family won't take the person, there really is nowhere for that person to go. Lack of opportunity to get a surety because you've usually burned your family so many times at this point. Addiction issues, lack of funding for community options, and lack of housing for women with mental health or capacity issues. So, I did it.
Awful being the time taskmaster. It's not a pleasant job, but we did want to save time for your questions. And I would just say that in Darlene referred to the Ontario policy on transgender issues. That was an Elizabeth Fry Society advocacy initiative as well, where we had a situation where a male to female trans woman was incarcerated in a male cell with 2 sex offenders overnight, resulting in significant risk to her, as you might imagine. And there was a significant amount of media on that. And as a result, they did change the policy. And I have to say, in fairness, the policy that the minister has brought in, Minister Nakvi in Ontario, is really good because it allows trans people to self-identify which which area they want to be incarcerated in. So if they don't have to have surgery, or they can self-identify, which is awesome. Anyway, we'll take questions. Thank you very much. Yes.
I had a question. You mentioned that the wait time for methadone upon entry into the prison. What does that wait time look like? And if it's longer than a week, are they being reassessed, or are they just giving their all dose?
I don't know is the short answer to that. I can tell you what the wait time we're hearing is sometimes 2 to 3 days. I don't know whether they're reassessed. That's a piece, I didn't ask that question, so thank you for the heads up. But I do know that those 2 to 3 days can be pretty damn hell for people.
Can I just say, regarding methadone in Pine Grove or in the women's institutions, often the women, when they're on the street, if you're at, say, 140 mils or whatever, they probably only take 40 of it and sell 100 of it. And then when they get into jail, they're given their full dose of 140, and then they're often charged for being high. So we see that over and over and over. Methadone is just a huge, big conundrum in the women's institution.
Yeah, and I would also say we had one case of a woman who said she was trying to wean down from methadone, and they wouldn't let her because they said you had to take the what was prescribed to the doctor. But the wait time to see a doctor was 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So she's saying, but I want to wean down. I'm going to be released. I want to start weaning. I'm trying to wean off. And they wouldn't let her do it. It seemed strange. Other questions? Yes?
I wanted to ask about strip searches, and particularly the practice of routine strip searches. As an Elizabeth Fry Society and a provincial advocate, it's something that's been reported as fairly routine and consistent. So I would like you to just comment on that.
Do you want? Are you addressing it? Okay, so maybe we'll start with Darlene then.
Strip searches are very common in Central Nova, Burnside, whatever you want to call it. I'll never get used to both names. If the women move at all, if there's any concern that there's contraband in the institution. I know women, they stopped TAing the women for a long, long time, but that used to be when I was aware that was predominantly when it was happening. But the women have told me that if there's any suspected stuff in there, they could be strip searched, their whole room could be searched. Like there was a lot of searches happening.
I know, because I know Joy, I know what she's referring to, which is that we've seen some jails. Now we're going into every jail across the province. We're starting to see where there are areas of concern. And we saw some jails that were just routinely strip searching the entire jail, which is an illegal strip search. You have to have cause. And so we have made that point that this is illegal. You can't decide that on Tuesday you're going to strip search the entire jail. And we have in fact presented case law to the ministry to demonstrate that illegality. So we would recommend that across the country that if you're seeing this happen and you're being told that they're not just strip searching an individual but strip searching an entire jail, challenge the legality of what they're doing, because it's gone. We have Supreme Court rulings that say that is illegal.
I would say it's relatively routine here. There's no quicker way to dehumanize a very progressive unit, or to maybe de-escalate an overzealous guard, who's very friendly with the clientele. Strip searches happen quite routinely.
Other questions? And feel free to direct them to one or all three.
This is directed at whoever can answer. In your reviews of these conditions of confinement across the country, when you notice that there are breaches, what is the remedy? Like you're saying that you're speaking with the ministry. What's the chain of command? How do you deal with the problem?
Well, as I said, we fought for 5 years to get a relationship with the ministry and with the minister, to try to say to them, it actually is to your benefit to have the Elizabeth Fry Society flag for you what are the issues which you may not know about, that the top of the ministry may not know what's going on the front lines, rather than have it hit the media. because that's otherwise what we're going to do. So as a result, I will say that Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies has worked with the EFRI provinces and territories to produce now what's called Human Rights in Action manuals. Those are available on the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies website. We encourage you to look at them. You can download them. And they actually say, what are your rights, your responsibilities, and the remedies open to you under the law? So Ontario has one, Saskatchewan, you know, with the East Coast. And what they will say is, you know, because it depends, what your remedies are will depend on what the infraction is. But when we go in, we say to women, if it's a human rights issue, you can go to the Human Rights Tribunal, and we can assist you to do that. You've got the Ombuds office, right? Yeah. All of the provinces and territories have something similar to the Ombuds office.
But it's a little different in the Atlantic because we have 4 provinces. And each province has a jail. So when we have the Human Rights in Action done, it was done in New Brunswick. It wasn't done in Nova Scotia. So those issues weren't brought in. But in terms of advocacy, EFRI Mainland, Nova Scotia, goes into the prison once a week, provides programming and meets with the women, and does the individual advocacy piece. When we were notified in the last couple of years around intermittent sentences, women who were from Cape Breton who got an intermittent sentence had to find their own way back and forth to jail in Halifax, which is very costly. You know, there was an equality issue there. Men didn't have to, they could do their intermittent sentence in Cape Breton. So when we asked Legal Aid, or when Legal Aid started to challenge that and we got involved, at the end of it, what had happened was they changed their policy. I think through the whole court proceedings, they changed their policy 3 times. Yeah, they can do it in Cape Breton. No, they can't. Yeah, they can. And so in the end, they pulled the challenge, and so we got a letter from Department of Justice saying that women can do their time. So what they did was they did it in other areas of the province, so those women are still paying to get their women back and forth. But
yeah,
the long and short of what I'm saying is that we've started, as a result of that, meeting with the director every second month to go over the issues, you know, childcare issues, doula programs, lack of programming, all of those things. And anything that comes to the forefront, then the region would discuss it, or Halifax could, in fact, bring it forward themselves and do something public.
In Saskatchewan, it's interesting because unlike the federal institutions, we have a contract to do third-party monitoring. You know, we report regularly. In the institution in Saskatchewan, we're not paid to go in and speak about any of the situations we see. However, we do visit and we do that. So we write a letter quite frequently. We take legal services with us. We go over the human rights. We let the women know all of their rights, what is happening within the institutions or the institution itself. And what we do is teach the women that nothing exists within the correctional institution if it isn't in writing. If it is not in writing, it didn't happen. So we really teach the women how you've got to write it out. You've got to, this is how you do it. This is how you write a grievance. This is how we invite the ombudsman in. You can complain all you want, but if it's not in writing, if we do not have a paper trail, we can't do that. And then currently we're trying to convince our provincial government that we are needed, that we can red flag things. So we have a push-pull right now.
And I would say, just in answer to your question, 2 things. First of all, the individual Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario may have a reintegration contract with the local jail. When we go in to do conditions of confinement inspections, we're not going in as a locally Fry. We're going in as provincial advocates of the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario, which is not a charity, which can do advocacy. We delisted as a charity in order to be able to do that. And we are wearing a completely separate hat from whatever contract we may or may not have with the jail. And the ministry and the minister understand that. So for example, we were able to get them to agree that now, the Ontario equivalent, which is a blue book, every woman in Ontario gets a copy of this handbook on admission, which details their rights, responsibilities, and the remedies open to them under the law. And when we do conditions of confinement inspections in these jails, we meet with the superintendent of the jail at the end of the visit, and we outline our concerns. We put them in writing. They follow up in writing. So there is a written record of our visit and whatever our concerns were year over year. Can we take the next question, please?
I'm quite alarmed to hear that men are moving into women's prisons, or that women's prisons are sort of being surrounded by the men's prisons as well. Can somebody help me? Isn't there some sort of international agreement that this should not be happening?
Well, a lot of the prisons that we're seeing now, provincially, we're talking about remand, and so there's a little unit of basically what is basically 90% a male prison, and then a little unit that is for women. And in some areas, it's very little. So it's, there's really not much for the women. And what we're seeing in terms of gender equity is some very real gender discrimination based on basically the economics of the fact that women are incarcerated at such a much lesser rate. And I'll give you a very concrete example. There are mandatory minimums, obviously, for things like drunk driving. And in Ontario, you can serve a mandatory minimum second arrest for drunk driving, doing basically day programming at the Salvation Army for addiction treatment, and then house arrest overnight, and you can serve it intermittently on weekends. There is no similar program for women. So we said, this is gender discrimination. Why can't women do this? Women have to sit and serve their sentence in the jail. The men are doing it with programming at Salvation Army and house arrest. This is very clear a violation of their human rights. And they said, well, it's economy of scale. We don't have enough women to run the program. So, I mean, but what it means is every single case of this, the Christina John case, if she'd been male, she would have been at the St. Lawrence Valley Treatment Center in Brockville, where she would have received 24-hour attention by a psychiatrist or with trained mental health nurses, making all the decisions around her care. But because she was female, there's no similar facility. So each one has to be basically challenged through the courts and through the Human Rights Tribunal in order to, and that's costly, expensive, it takes 3 years, and that's what we're doing now. We're just pushing them through in terms of legislative challenges, because otherwise we're not seeing any gains. And the economy of scale argument is used like there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, that's the point. I mean, is there anything done with that kind of argument? In the old days, you used to say you can't use economic arguments to negate human rights claims.
That's right, you can't, and we're winning when we go to the Human Rights Tribunal.
But you have to fight each one.
Exactly, each one. Yes.
You mentioned you kind of encourage them to write complaints and to issue complaints. What do you see for reprisals on what you leave, I guess?
Do you want to go for that?
It's been really interesting because we actually have our lawyer write a lot of the grievances, and there's a notable difference between somebody who might not have a grade 8 a background, and all of a sudden you have this very concrete letter written, and it's CC'd to us and the ombudsman or whatever. More and more they're listening to us, and more they're welcoming us in and saying, yeah, maybe we do need to make some differences and changes. That hasn't equated to a great bunch of money coming my way for a contract of service, but there is a agreement that, for the most part, I mean,
the question was about reprisals on women, though, and
there hasn't been. It's been good. It's been positive.
So I can say in Ontario there are reprisals. It's illegal. It's against their own rules and their own regulations to make reprisals on somebody who's lawfully doing what they are supposed to do when they have a legitimate grievance. However, it does happen. So when we go in and we're encouraging women, write to the superintendent, phone the ombuds office, whatever, what we say to them is, you need to make this decision because you're the one who, if there's going to be a reprisal, you're the one who has to live with that. We leave.
Yeah.
You don't get to. So we can tell you that there's not supposed to be reprisals. We can tell you that if the one does happen, you can call us back and we can come in and deal with that too, but you're still the one living with that. When we were last in the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre, women were saying, for example, they would ask for ombuds forms and they would be told, what do you need it for? We're not giving it to you until you tell us why you want it, which is illegal. We actually had our worker in the jail, our E-Fry worker in the jail, being chastised because she helped a woman write an ombuds form. And then the other guard, the correctional officers in the jail were saying, well, why didn't you give us a heads up what she was complaining about? Well, that's not your role. You know, it's not our role to do that. And in fact, but they were ostracizing her because she was fulfilling her mandate. So there is that push-pull, and it's...
to be honest, I see that more federally than provincially for me.
How about in Cape Breton?
It's in Halifax, not Cape Breton.
Sorry.
There's always a pushback, and Heather and I had done a gathering of the women at one point, and staff felt they had to come because they were very concerned with what information we were going to be passing on.
Yeah.
And I remember one woman said that, she needed addictions counseling because she was never going to get parole without it. And, that nobody would help her get the addictions counseling. Well, the staff person almost ate her alive in front of us, well, you have to ask for help. It was, you can clearly see.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a sense of apathy, what's going to happen anyway, because there's been so little in that institution for so long. And so Heather takes it on an individual basis with the women, and I'm taking it as a systemic level with the director. The two of us will do that as well. So I think there's always going to be reprisals when women speak.
We also want to say, we're very conscious. We're in the jails. We know there are correctional officers who are doing their best, who are doing a fantastic job and really trying to listen to the women and respond to the women's concerns. We're not trying to paint everybody with the same brush here. But at the same point, that lack of consistency is itself a problem. It shouldn't depend on which guard is on duty for the woman to receive access to the ombuds form or legitimately get access to what is their legal rights. So
Central Nova has also has the ombudsman coming in regularly to meet with the women. So they have instituted that.
And the number of staffing that we have seen that are new, brand new, and very, very young and unsophisticated are, it's huge. It's high. They are, they're in the process of being trained, but you have to work a certain amount of time before you're given access to training. They often pull us aside and ask us what the rules are. They don't know.
Can we take another question, please? Because we're just finishing up. Last one.
That was actually the line of questioning I was going to ask about your experience. Where I work, we deal with a lot of institutional disciplinary matters. Now it's mostly men. I wanted to ask your experience about the rules of procedural fairness being followed or even known about, because I find that people don't like us, the COs, but I also find it because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, like what Sue has said. And then also asked if you're seeing a trend at all lately, because we have of punishment being if people are found to be tonguing their medication, then they get their medication taken
Withdrawn. Yes, we have seen it.
That all the time.
To me, that's asinine.
Yes, it is to us too. I'm glad to hear you say that. And yes, we do see it.
Yeah, quite regularly.
Okay, and we are at, just check the time here. We're at 2:22, which means we're overdue to end, I believe. We had to 1 to 2:15, so thank you for your attention.